What happens when a battle-hardened soldier thinks he's found an easy target, only to discover he's just challenged someone who trains the world's most elite warriors? Sometimes the person who looks most vulnerable on the outside possesses a strength that could humble even the toughest military personnel. This is the story of Marcus Rodriguez, a decorated Army Ranger who thought his combat experience made him untouchable, and Sarah Chun, a petite fitness trainer whose quiet demeanor masked an extraordinary secret. When their worlds collided at a downtown gym, what started as a moment of misguided aggression would transform into a lesson about respect, humility, and the true meaning of strength. In a world where assumptions run deep and first impressions can be dangerously wrong, this encounter would challenge everything Marcus thought he knew about power, leadership, and what it really means to be a warrior. The steel plates clanged against each other as Marcus Rodriguez loaded another 45 pounds onto the barbell. Sweat dripped from his forehead onto the gym floor, mixing with the chalk dust that seemed to coat everything in Iron Haven Fitness. The familiar burn in his shoulders felt good, reminding him of the countless hours he had spent training during his deployment in Afghanistan. 3 months back from his second tour, Marcus was struggling to find his place in civilian life, but the gym provided a sanctuary where things made sense. Marcus stood 6 feet 2 inches tall, with the kind of build that came from years of military training and combat operations. His arms were covered in tattoos that told the story of his service, including the Ranger tab on his left shoulder and the names of fallen brothers on his right forearm. His dark hair was cropped short in a regulation cut that he maintained even though he no longer had to, and his brown eyes carried the intensity of someone who had seen too much for his 28 years. The gym was busier than usual for a Tuesday afternoon. Marcus preferred the quieter hours when he could focus on his workout without dealing with the typical crowd of weekend warriors and fitness enthusiasts who seemed more interested in taking selfies than actually training. But his work schedule at the construction company had forced him to adjust his routine, and now he found himself surrounded by the usual mix of college students, office workers trying to squeeze in a quick session, and the occasional serious athlete. He was in the middle of his third set of overhead presses when he noticed her. A small Asian woman, probably in her mid-20s, was setting up at the squat rack next to his station. She couldn't have been more than 5 feet 4 inches tall and maybe 120 pounds soaking wet. Her long black hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore basic gray workout clothes that looked like they had seen better days. What caught his attention wasn't her appearance, but the way she moved with quiet confidence as she began loading weight onto the barbell. Marcus watched out of the corner of his eye as she added plate after plate. 145, then 2, then 3 on each side. He paused his own workout, curious to see what she was planning. Most women in the gym, even the serious lifters, rarely went above 2 plates for squats. But she kept adding weight, her movements methodical and deliberate. When she finished loading the bar, Marcus did a quick mental calculation. 3 45-pound plates on each side, plus the 45-pound barbell itself, meant she was preparing to squat 315 pounds. That was more than most of the men in the gym could handle, let alone someone who looked like she could be blown over by a strong wind. She stepped under the bar without any fanfare, positioned it across her shoulders, and lifted it off the rack. Marcus stopped his own set completely, waiting for the inevitable failure. There was no way someone that small could handle that much weight. He was already preparing to step in and help when she began her descent. Down she went, her form perfect, her back straight, her knees tracking properly over her toes. At the bottom of the squat, she paused for a moment before driving back up with explosive power. The weight that Marcus had expected to crush her moved, as if it were nothing more than an empty barbell. She completed the rep, took a breath, and did it again. Marcus found himself staring openly now, his own workout forgotten. She knocked out 10 perfect reps like she was warming up with just the barbell. When she finished her set, she calmly racked the weight and began adding more plates. The rational part of Marcus's mind told him he should be impressed. Here was obviously a serious athlete who had put in years of training to develop that kind of strength. But another part of him, the part shaped by military culture and his own struggles with feeling displaced in civilian life, was irritated. It didn't make sense to him that someone who looked so ordinary could be so strong. In his world, strength was earned through hardship, through crawling through mud and carrying fallen comrades and facing down enemy fire. It wasn't something you developed by counting reps in a comfortable gym. As she prepared for her next set, now with 360 on the bar, Marcus approached her. He told himself he was just being helpful, looking out for someone who was clearly in over their head. The fact that she had just completed a set that most people couldn't even attempt didn't register in his mind the way it should have. "Hey there," he said, stepping closer to the squat rack. "You sure you want to keep adding weight like that? That's getting pretty heavy." She looked up at him with dark eyes that seemed to take in everything about him in a single glance. Her expression was neutral, neither friendly nor hostile, just alert. When she spoke, her voice was calm and steady. "I appreciate the concern, but I got it handled." Marcus felt his jaw tighten. The dismissive tone reminded him of officers who had never seen combat, but still felt entitled to give orders to soldiers who had been in the thick of it. Here was this tiny civilian woman brushing off advice from someone who had spent years training with some of the toughest soldiers in the world. "Look, I'm not trying to be a jerk here," he continued, his voice taking on an edge that he didn't entirely intend. "I've been lifting for 15 years, deployed twice with the Rangers. I know what I'm talking about when it comes to training. You're going to hurt yourself trying to lift that much weight." She paused in her preparation and looked at him more directly. There was something in her gaze that should have warned him off, a quiet intensity that spoke of someone who was used to being underestimated and had learned how to handle it. "I understand you're trying to help," she said, her tone remaining level. "But I really do know my limits. I've been doing this for a while." The way she said it, so calm and dismissive, pushed Marcus over an edge he hadn't realized he was approaching. The frustration of his difficult transition back to civilian life, the feeling of being just another face in a world that didn't seem to value what he had sacrificed, all of it came bubbling to the surface. "A while," he said, his voice louder now, drawing attention from other gym members. "Lady, I've been training longer than you've probably been alive. I've carried wounded soldiers through mountains, done PT sessions in 120-degree heat, and pushed my body to limits you can't even imagine. Don't tell me about knowing limits." The gym around them had grown noticeably quieter. Several people had stopped their workouts to watch the confrontation unfold. Marcus was vaguely aware that he was making a scene, but the adrenaline was flowing now, and he couldn't seem to stop himself. She studied him for a long moment, and he could see her making some kind of calculation behind her eyes. When she finally spoke, her voice was still calm, but there was something different about it now, something that made him think of the moment right before enemy contact when everything went silent. "I respect your service," she said, "and I'm sure you've overcome a lot of challenges. But right now, you're assuming things about me based on how I look, and you're letting that assumption make you act in a way that isn't really fair to either of us." Marcus felt heat rise in his chest. The fact that she was being reasonable made him even angrier. He wanted her to get defensive to prove his point about civilian weakness. Instead, she was speaking to him like he was a child having a tantrum. Fair, he said. You want to talk about fair? You know what's not fair? Coming home from serving your country and having to listen to people who have never faced real adversity tell you about limits and challenges. Several gym members had moved closer now, and Marcus could see concern on their faces. A part of him knew he was crossing a line, but the anger felt good after months of feeling lost and purposeless. This woman, with her calm demeanor and obvious strength, had somehow become a symbol of everything that frustrated him about civilian life. She looked at him for another long moment, then began unloading the weight from the barbell. For a second, Marcus thought she was giving up, proving his point about civilians backing down when confronted with real aggression. But instead of walking away, she reduced the weight to two 45-pound plates on each side, a relatively modest 185 pounds. Tell you what, she said, stepping back from the rack. Why don't you show me how it's done? You got all that experience and training. Should be easy enough for you. The challenge was delivered so quietly that Marcus almost missed it. But the implication was clear, and several of the watching gym members had caught it too. She was calling him out, suggesting that for all his talk about superior training and experience, he might not actually be able to back it up. Marcus felt his face flush. 185 pounds wasn't particularly heavy for him. He had squatted much more than that during his military training. But something about the way she said it, the quiet confidence in her voice, made him second-guess himself. Fine, he said, moving toward the rack. I'll show you how someone with real training handles weight. He positioned himself under the barbell, feeling the eyes of the watching crowd on him. The weight felt heavier than it should have as he lifted it off the rack. His form, which had been drilled into him through years of training, suddenly felt awkward and uncertain. As he began his descent, Marcus realized he had made a mistake. The confrontation had left him tense and angry, his breathing shallow and irregular. The weight that should have been manageable felt unwieldy in his hands. Halfway down into the squat, he felt his balance shift and panic shot through him. He tried to recover, pushing back up with everything he had, but his form was completely compromised now. The barbell tilted dangerously to one side, and he had to step forward to avoid falling backward. The weight crashed down onto the safety bars with a loud clang that echoed through the suddenly silent gym. Marcus stood there for a moment, breathing hard, his face burning with embarrassment. Around him, he could feel the mixture of concern and secondhand embarrassment from the other gym members. But what bothered him most was the expression on the small woman's face. She wasn't smug or satisfied. Instead, she looked genuinely sorry for him. Everyone has off days, she said quietly, moving back toward the rack. And anger can really mess with your form. She reloaded the weight she had been using before, 315 pounds that had looked impossible when Marcus first saw her preparing for it. This time, he watched more carefully as she positioned herself under the bar, noting the way she took several deep breaths to center herself, the way her feet were positioned, the way she engaged her core before even lifting the weight off the rack. When she completed her set of 10 reps, each one as smooth and controlled as the first, the watching crowd began to disperse. The show was over, and Marcus had clearly come out on the losing side. He stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do next, feeling smaller than he had since his first day of basic training. She finished her workout with several more sets that left him speechless. Not just the weight she was moving, but the precision and control with which she moved it. This wasn't someone who had just gotten lucky or was trying to show off. This was the result of years of dedicated training and a level of discipline that Marcus recognized from his military experience. When she finally finished and began cleaning up her area, Marcus found himself approaching her again. This time, however, the anger was gone, replaced by curiosity and a grudging respect. "Look," he said, his voice much quieter than before. "I owe you an apology. I was out of line, and I made assumptions I shouldn't have made." She looked up at him as she wiped down the barbell with a towel. "I accept your apology," she said, "and I understand you're dealing with your own stuff. Transition back to civilian life can be tough." The fact that she understood what he was going through without him having to explain it made him feel both grateful and uncomfortable. "How did you know that?" "I've worked with a lot of veterans," she said simply. "It's part of what I do." Marcus felt a spark of curiosity. "What do you do?" She paused in her cleaning and seemed to consider how much to tell him. "I'm a fitness trainer. I work with people who need to maintain very high levels of physical conditioning for their jobs." Something about the way she said it suggested there was more to the story, but Marcus didn't push. He had already overstepped enough boundaries for one day. "Well, whoever you train is lucky to have you," he said. "What you did in there, that level of strength and control, that's not normal. That's elite level stuff." For the first time since their confrontation had started, she smiled slightly. "Thank you. That means something coming from someone with your background." As she gathered her things and prepared to leave, Marcus found himself wanting to know more about this woman who had so thoroughly challenged his assumptions. But he also knew that he had burned whatever bridge might have existed between them. "Maybe I'll see you around," he said as she headed toward the exit. "Maybe," she replied, but her tone suggested that she wasn't particularly looking forward to it. After she left, Marcus remained in the gym for another hour, but his heart wasn't in the workout anymore. He kept replaying the confrontation in his mind, analyzing where he had gone wrong. Not just the failed squat attempt, but the entire approach. He had let his frustrations and prejudices cloud his judgment, and as a result, he had made a fool of himself in front of someone who clearly deserved respect rather than aggression. As he drove home that evening, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that he had encountered someone truly extraordinary, and that his own behavior had ensured he would never get the chance to learn from her. The woman's calm strength and professional demeanor reminded him of some of the best leaders he had served under in the military, people who commanded respect through competence rather than intimidation. That night, lying in bed in his small apartment, Marcus found himself thinking about the way she had handled his aggression. She hadn't gotten defensive or tried to prove herself through confrontation. Instead, she had maintained her composure and let her actions speak for themselves. It was a level of emotional control that he realized he had lost somewhere between his last deployment and his return to civilian life. For the first time in months, Marcus began to wonder if maybe the problem wasn't with civilian life itself, but with how he was approaching it. Maybe the real challenge wasn't proving his superiority over people who hadn't shared his experiences, but learning to find his place in a world that operated by different rules than the military. As he drifted off to sleep, Marcus made a mental note to return to the gym at the same time the next day. Not to confront the mysterious trainer again, but to observe and perhaps, if he was lucky, to learn something about the kind of quiet strength that didn't need to announce itself to be recognized. Marcus arrived at Iron Haven Fitness 15 minutes earlier than usual the next day, hoping to catch another glimpse of the woman who had so thoroughly humbled him. He had spent most of the night replaying their encounter, cringing at his own behavior, and trying to understand what had driven him to act so aggressively toward a complete stranger. The rational part of his mind knew that his transition difficulties were no excuse for taking out his frustrations on innocent people, but knowing it and controlling it seemed to be two different things. The gym was quieter at this time, with only a handful of serious lifters scattered throughout the facility. Marcus went through his warm-up routine mechanically, his attention focused on the entrance rather than his stretching. He had no clear plan for what he would do if she showed up again. The memory of her calm professionalism in the face of his hostility made him realize that any attempt at conversation would need to be carefully considered. 20 minutes into his workout, she walked through the front door. Today she was wearing different clothes, black athletic pants, and a navy blue tank top that somehow looked more professional than the casual gray outfit from the day before. Her hair was pulled back in the same practical ponytail, and she carried a large gym bag that looked well-used and expensive. Marcus watched her from across the gym as she went through what was clearly an established routine. She spent several minutes on dynamic warm-ups, moving through a series of stretches and mobility exercises that looked more sophisticated than anything he had learned in the military. Her movements were fluid and purposeful, each exercise flowing seamlessly into the next. What struck him most was her focus. She seemed completely absorbed in her preparation, paying no attention to the other gym members around her. There was something almost meditative about the way she approached her training, as if the physical movement was helping her process thoughts and emotions that existed beyond the gym walls. When she moved to the weights section, Marcus positioned himself at a machine that gave him a clear view of her workout area. He told himself he was just curious about her training methods, but he knew his interest went deeper than that. Yesterday's encounter had left him with questions that he couldn't answer, and he found himself studying her technique with the same attention he had once applied to analyzing enemy positions. Her workout today was different from the heavy squats that had initially caught his attention. Instead, she was doing what appeared to be a conditioning circuit, moving between different exercises with minimal rest. She started with pull-ups, knocking out sets of 10 with perfect form, her chin clearing the bar each time before lowering herself with complete control. Marcus counted under his breath as she completed rep after rep. Most people struggled to do 10 pull-ups in a single set, but she was treating them like warm-up exercises. After completing 4 sets of 10, she moved immediately to a set of parallel bars for dips, again displaying the kind of upper body strength that was rare even among serious male athletes. As she continued her circuit, moving through box jumps, kettlebell swings, and burpees with mechanical precision, Marcus began to understand that what he was witnessing went far beyond normal fitness training. The intensity and sophistication of her workout suggested someone who was training for something specific, something that required an extraordinary level of physical conditioning. Halfway through her session, she paused to check something on her phone. As she scrolled through what appeared to be a training plan, Marcus noticed other details about her that had escaped his attention the previous day. Her hands showed the calluses of someone who spent serious time gripping barbells and pull-up bars. Her forearms displayed the kind of definition that came from years of functional strength training. Most telling, she moved with the subtle confidence of someone who was completely comfortable in her own body, someone who knew exactly what she was capable of. When she finished checking her phone and prepared to resume her workout, she glanced in his direction. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and Marcus felt a flush of embarrassment at being caught staring. But instead of the coldness he expected, her expression was neutral, perhaps even slightly curious. She completed her workout with a series of core exercises that left Marcus feeling inadequate about his own training regimen. As she began cleaning up her area, he found himself approaching her again, but this time with a very different energy than the day before. "Excuse me," he said, stopping a respectful distance away. "I wanted to apologize again for yesterday. I was completely out of line, and I've been thinking about it all night." She looked up from wiping down a kettlebell, studying his face as if trying to assess his sincerity. "I appreciate that," she said, "and I hope you're feeling better today." The genuine concern in her voice made Marcus feel even worse about his previous behavior. "I am, thanks to you actually. Watching you handle that situation yesterday made me realize some things about myself that I needed to see." She finished cleaning the kettlebell and set it back on the rack before responding. "We all have moments we're not proud of. What matters is what we do with them afterward." Her response was so measured and thoughtful that Marcus found himself wondering about her background. The way she spoke suggested someone who had experience dealing with difficult personalities and high-stress situations. Combined with her extraordinary physical capabilities, it painted a picture of someone whose life was far more complex than her quiet demeanor suggested. "Can I ask you something?" Marcus said, then quickly added, "And please tell me if I'm overstepping again." She nodded for him to continue. "Your training yesterday and what I watched today, that's not normal gym stuff. That's elite-level conditioning. Are you a competitive athlete or something?" She paused for a moment, and Marcus could see her weighing how much to reveal. "I work in fitness," she said carefully. "My job requires me to maintain a certain level of conditioning, and I also need to be able to demonstrate exercises for clients who have very demanding physical requirements." The way she phrased it suggested there was much more to the story, but Marcus didn't push. Instead, he found himself genuinely curious about her professional perspective. "What kind of clients?" he asked. "People in high-stress, physically demanding jobs," she said. "Law enforcement, military, emergency responders. People who need to be able to perform under pressure." Marcus felt a spark of recognition. "You work with military personnel?" "Among others, yes." Something in her tone suggested that military personnel might actually be a specialty of hers, but Marcus sensed that pressing for details would shut down the conversation. Instead, he decided to take a different approach. "I have to admit, I'm impressed," he said. "What you're doing in here, it's on a level I haven't seen outside of special operations training. Whoever trained you did an incredible job." For the first time since their conversation had started, she smiled slightly. "Thank you. That means something coming from someone with your background." "You keep saying that," Marcus observed. "You seem to know more about my background than I've told you." She looked at him more directly. "You carry yourself like military, specifically combat arms. The way you move, the way you assess your surroundings, the tattoos. And yesterday, the way you handle frustration and perceive challenges to authority. It's a common pattern I see with people transitioning out of high-intensity military roles." Her analysis was so accurate that Marcus felt momentarily exposed. "You really do work with a lot of veterans." "You do. And I've learned that the same qualities that make someone an effective soldier can sometimes make civilian life more challenging. The aggression and competitiveness that serve you well in combat don't always translate to everyday situations." Marcus found himself nodding. "That's exactly what I've been struggling with. Everything feels so soft and meaningless compared to what I'm used to. People complaining about problems that seem trivial, getting worked up over things that don't really matter." "But here's the thing," she said, sitting down on a bench and gesturing for him to join her. "Those people aren't wrong for caring about their problems, even if they seem small to you. And the fact that you've experienced greater challenges doesn't invalidate their experiences." Marcus sat down, surprised to find himself in what felt like a counseling session with someone he had tried to intimidate just 24 hours earlier. "The transition is hard because you're not just changing jobs," she continued. "You're changing entire worldviews. In the military, everything has a clear purpose related to the mission. In civilian life, people are pursuing all kinds of different goals, and what seems meaningless to you might be deeply important to them. So how do you deal with that? How do you find purpose in a world that doesn't seem to have any? She was quiet for a moment, considering her response. You create it. You take the qualities that made you good at your military job and find ways to apply them in civilian contexts. The discipline, the leadership, the ability to perform under pressure, those things are incredibly valuable in the right situations. Like what? Well, take fitness training, for example. The discipline and attention to detail you learned in the military would make you an excellent trainer for people who need serious conditioning. You understand what it takes to push through barriers and maintain standards even when things get difficult. Marcus felt a flutter of interest. Is that what you do? Help military people transition into fitness careers. Sometimes, she said, but more often, I help them find ways to use their military experience in their current civilian roles. A lot of veterans think they have to choose between their military identity and their civilian life, but the best transitions happen when you can integrate both. As they talked, Marcus found himself opening up about his struggles in ways he hadn't with anyone since returning from deployment. She listened without judgment, occasionally asking questions that helped him clarify his own thoughts. Her insights into the transition process suggested someone who had either been through it herself or had extensive experience helping others navigate it. Can I ask you something personal? Marcus said as their conversation began to wind down. She nodded. Yesterday, when I was getting aggressive with you, you stayed so calm. How do you do that? I used to be able to control my emotions, but lately, everything sets me off. She considered the question carefully. Part of it comes from training, part from experience. But mostly, it comes from understanding that other people's behavior says more about them than it does about me. When someone gets aggressive or confrontational, they're usually dealing with their own pain or frustration. Responding with more aggression just escalates the situation. That's pretty advanced emotional intelligence for a fitness trainer, Marcus observed. She looked at him with an expression that was both amused and mysterious. You might be surprised what skills are required in this line of work. Something about the way she said it made Marcus think there were layers to her story that he wasn't seeing. But before he could pursue the thought, she was gathering her things and preparing to leave. Will you be here tomorrow? He asked. Probably, she said. I try to train at the same time most days. Maybe I could buy you coffee afterward, as a proper apology for yesterday, and to thank you for the conversation today. She paused, considering the offer. I don't usually socialize with other gym members, she said, but I appreciate the gesture. Marcus felt a stab of disappointment, but he tried not to show it. Understand. Professional boundaries and all that. It's more complicated than that, she said, but didn't elaborate. As she headed toward the exit, Marcus called after her. Hey, I never got your name. She turned back with that slight smile. Sarah, she said. Sarah Chun. Marcus Rodriguez, he replied. And Sarah? Thank you. For yesterday and today. I needed to hear those things. Take care of yourself, Marcus, she said. And remember what we talked about. The transition takes time, but you'll figure it out. After she left, Marcus finished his workout with more focus than he had managed in weeks. The conversation had given him things to think about, perspectives he hadn't considered. For the first time since returning from deployment, he felt like he had talked to someone who understood what he was going through without trying to fix him or minimize his experience. As he drove home, Marcus found himself wondering about Sarah Chen's story. The combination of elite physical conditioning, sophisticated understanding of military psychology, and professional boundaries suggested someone whose life involved far more than basic fitness training. But what intrigued him most was the sense that she had her own experiences with high-pressure situations, her own understanding of what it meant to operate at the highest levels of performance. That evening, Marcus found himself researching fitness careers online, something he hadn't seriously considered since leaving the military. The conversation with Sarah had planted a seed of possibility, the idea that maybe his military experience wasn't just a burden to be overcome, but a foundation to be built upon. For the first time in months, Marcus went to bed with a sense of anticipation about the future rather than dread. Whatever Sarah's story was, their encounter had opened a door to possibilities he hadn't imagined. And while she had declined his invitation for coffee, something told him that their paths would cross again, perhaps in ways neither of them expected. The next morning, Marcus woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. He had a feeling that meeting Sarah Chun was going to change his life in ways he couldn't yet imagine. What he didn't know was that the changes would be far more dramatic than anything he could have anticipated. Over the following 2 weeks, Marcus and Sarah developed an unexpected routine. They would train at the same time, occasionally exchanging brief conversations between sets, but never pushing beyond the boundaries she had established. Marcus found himself looking forward to these encounters more than he cared to admit. Sarah's presence had become a stabilizing force in his day, a reminder that not everyone in the civilian world was weak or lacking in discipline. He began paying closer attention to her training methods, noticing patterns and techniques that he tried to incorporate into his own workouts. Her approach to fitness was unlike anything he had encountered, even during his military training. Every movement seemed to serve a specific purpose, every exercise designed to build not just strength, but functional capability. She trained like someone who might need to use her physical conditioning in real-world situations where failure wasn't an option. Marcus also noticed that other gym members treated Sarah with unusual respect. The typical gym culture of showing off and competing for attention seemed to evaporate when she was around. Even the most aggressive bodybuilders and alpha male types gave her space and acknowledged her with nods of recognition. It was the kind of respect that was earned, not demanded, and it made Marcus even more curious about who she really was. On a Thursday afternoon, Marcus was finishing his workout when he overheard a conversation that changed everything. 2 men in their 30s, both with military haircuts and the bearing of active-duty personnel, were talking near the water fountain as Sarah completed her training session. "I can't believe she's training here," one of them said, his voice carrying a note of awe. "Do you know who that is?" "No idea," the second man replied. "Should I?" "That's Sarah Chun. She's the head fitness coordinator for SEAL Team 6. She designs and oversees conditioning programs for the most elite special operations units in the military. That woman has trained Navy SEALs, Delta Force, Rangers, you name it. She's a legend in spec ops circles." Marcus felt his world shift. He stopped gathering his equipment and strained to hear more of the conversation. "Seriously? She looks so normal. That's the point. She's not supposed to stand out. But I heard she can outperform most of the operators she trains. There's stories about her keeping up with SEAL platoons during Hell Week preparation, matching them exercise for exercise. Some say she's tougher than half the guys who make it through selection. What's she doing at a civilian gym? No idea. Maybe she's between assignments or working on something classified. But, dude, if you ever get a chance to train with her, take it. People pay thousands of dollars to attend her seminars." The 2 men moved away, their voices fading as they headed toward the locker room. Marcus stood frozen, his mind reeling from what he had just learned. Sarah Chun wasn't just a fitness trainer who worked with military personnel. She was apparently one of the most elite conditioning specialists in the entire special operations community. Suddenly, everything made sense. Her extraordinary strength and conditioning, her sophisticated training methods, her insight into military psychology and the transition process. She wasn't someone who worked with special operations personnel occasionally. She was someone who had dedicated her career to understanding and developing the physical capabilities of the most elite warriors in the world. Marcus looked across the gym to where Sarah was finishing her cool-down stretches. The revelation didn't change her physical appearance, but it completely altered how he saw her. This wasn't just a woman who happened to be strong. This was someone who had earned her place among the most elite military units on the planet through sheer competence and dedication. The memory of his aggressive confrontation 2 weeks earlier made him feel physically ill. He had tried to intimidate someone who probably knew more about physical training and mental toughness than anyone he had ever encountered. Worse, he had dismissed her as just another civilian who couldn't understand real hardship, when in fact she had likely witnessed and facilitated more military excellence than most soldiers ever would. As Sarah gathered her things and prepared to leave, Marcus found himself approaching her once again. But this time, his motivation was entirely different. He needed to know if what he had overheard was true, and if so, he needed to understand how he had so completely misjudged the situation. "Sarah," he called out as she headed toward the exit. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" She paused and looked back at him. There was something different in her expression, as if she could sense that this conversation was going to be unlike their previous interactions. "Of course," she said, setting down her gym bag. "What's on your mind?" Marcus struggled with how to begin. Direct confrontation was his default approach, but everything about his relationship with Sarah had taught him that subtlety and respect yielded better results. "I overheard something today," he said carefully, "about your work, about who you really are." Sarah's expression didn't change, but Marcus saw something shift behind her eyes. She was evaluating him, making calculations about how much to reveal and how to handle whatever was coming next. "People talk," she said neutrally. "What did you hear? That you're not just a fitness trainer, that you work with Navy SEALs, that you're Sarah Chun." The way he said her name, with emphasis and recognition, made it clear that he understood the significance of the information. Sarah studied his face for a long moment before responding. "And how does that make you feel?" she asked. The question caught Marcus off guard. He had expected denial or confirmation, not a psychological probe. But as he considered his answer, he realized that his emotional response was more complex than he had anticipated. "Embarrassed," he said honestly, "humbled, and curious about why you didn't tell me." "Would it have changed how you treated me that first day?" she asked. Marcus considered the question seriously. Would knowing about her elite credentials have prevented his aggressive behavior, or would it have simply changed the nature of his challenges to her authority? "I don't know," he admitted. "Maybe, but it definitely would have changed my approach." "That's exactly why I don't usually mention it," Sarah said. "People treat me differently when they know about my work. They either become intimidated and deferential, or they become more aggressive because they feel like they have something to prove against someone with my reputation." And what did I do? Both, actually. First the aggression, then the deference. But lately, you've been treating me like a person, which is what I prefer. Marcus felt a mix of relief and continued embarrassment. "So it's true then? You really train Navy SEALs?" Sarah looked around the gym, noting that their conversation was attracting some attention from other members. "Walk with me," she said, picking up her bag and heading toward a quieter corner of the facility. When they reached a relatively private area near the stretching mats, Sarah set down her bag and faced him directly. "Yes, it's true," she said. "I've been working with special operations units for 8 years. I design conditioning programs, oversee training protocols, and sometimes participate directly in preparation for specific missions." How does someone get into that line of work? Marcus asked, genuinely curious. Long story, Sarah said. But the short version is that I started as a civilian contractor working on base fitness programs. I had degrees in exercise physiology and sports psychology, plus some personal experience that made me understand the unique demands of military training. Over time, I proved I could design programs that improved performance and reduced injury rates. Word spread, and eventually I was recruited to work with more specialized units. Personal experience? Sarah hesitated, and Marcus could see her weighing how much to reveal. My father was a Marine. My brother was Army Special Forces. I grew up around military culture and understood the mindset. Plus, I competed in powerlifting and martial arts at a high level, so I had my own experience with pushing physical and mental limits. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to come together for Marcus. Sarah's combination of academic knowledge, personal athletic achievement, and cultural understanding of military life had positioned her perfectly for her unique career path. That's incredible, he said, and explains a lot about why you handle my breakdown so professionally. You weren't having a breakdown, Sarah corrected. You were having a normal response to a difficult transition. I see it all the time. Do you counsel people as part of your job? Informally, yes. Physical conditioning and mental resilience are closely connected. Part of my job is helping people understand how to maintain both when they're under extreme stress. That includes helping them transition between different phases of their careers. Marcus found himself wondering about the scope of Sarah's responsibilities. What else do you do? Besides design training programs, I mean. Sarah looked at him carefully, as if deciding how much operational detail she was comfortable sharing. Sometimes I travel to training sites to oversee preparation for specific missions. Sometimes I work directly with teams to help them prepare for particular physical challenges they might encounter. And sometimes I help with assessment and selection processes. You help select Navy SEALs? Among other things, yes. Fitness standards are just one component of selection, but they're an important one. I help design tests that predict how candidates will perform under real-world stress. The scope of Sarah's influence was staggering to Marcus. This was someone who had direct input into who became part of the most elite military units in the world. Her work didn't just support special operations, it helped define them. I have to ask, Marcus said, when you told me I had the qualities to be a fitness trainer, were you just being nice? Or did you actually mean it? Sarah smiled, the first fully genuine smile he had seen from her. I meant it. Your military experience, combined with your obvious dedication to training, would make you effective in the right context. But you need to work on the emotional regulation part. Would you be willing to help with that? To train me, I mean. The question hung between them for a long moment. Marcus could see Sarah considering not just his request, but its implications. Training him would mean breaking down the professional boundaries she had maintained, potentially creating complications in her carefully ordered life. That will be complicated, she said finally. My work requires a certain level of security clearance and discretion. Taking on civilian students isn't something I normally do. What if it wasn't civilian? Marcus asked. What if I try to get back into military fitness in some capacity? Sarah studied his face, looking for signs of genuine commitment versus impulsive enthusiasm. That would be a significant career change. Are you sure you've thought it through? I've been thinking about it since our first real conversation, Marcus said. You helped me realize that I don't have to choose between my military experience and civilian life. Maybe I can find a way to bridge both. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, and Marcus could practically see her mind working through the possibilities and complications. When she finally spoke, her tone was professional but not discouraging. If you're serious about this, there are steps you need to take. Education, certification, probably some additional military training or contracting work to build credibility. It's not something that happens overnight. I'm willing to do whatever it takes, Marcus said. I just need guidance on where to start. Sarah looked at him for another long moment, then reached in her gym bag and pulled out a business card. It was simple and professional, with just her name, credentials, and contact information. "Email me," she said. "We can discuss what a transition plan might look like. But understand that if I agree to help you, it won't be casual mentoring. It will be a serious professional development program with specific expectations and standards." Marcus took the card, feeling the weight of possibility it represented. "I understand. And Sarah, thank you for giving me a chance after the way I acted when we first met. Everyone deserves a second chance," she said. "The question is what you do with it." As Sarah left the gym, Marcus looked down at the business card in his hand. Below her name and contact information, he noticed a line he hadn't seen before: Special Operations Fitness Consulting, Classified Programs Division. For the first time since leaving the military, Marcus felt like he might have found a path forward that honored both where he had been and where he wanted to go. Whatever came next, he knew that meeting Sarah Chun had changed the trajectory of his life in ways he was only beginning to understand. That night, Marcus sat at his computer, composing an email that would either open the door to an extraordinary new career or confirm that some opportunities were too good to be true. Either way, he knew there was no going back to the aimless frustration that had defined his life just a few weeks earlier. The soldier in him had found a new mission, and the man he was becoming finally had a direction worth pursuing. Marcus stared at his laptop screen for over an hour before finally sending the email to Sarah. He had written and rewritten it a dozen times, trying to strike the right balance between professional interest and genuine commitment. When he finally hit send, it was with a simple message expressing his serious intent to pursue military fitness consulting and requesting guidance on next steps. Sarah's response came the following morning, brief but encouraging. She suggested they meet for coffee to discuss possibilities, noting that if he was truly committed, there were opportunities available, but the path would be demanding. They arranged to meet on Saturday at a small cafe near the gym, neutral territory where they could have a more substantive conversation than their brief gym encounters allowed. When Saturday arrived, Marcus found himself more nervous than he had been before any military operation. This wasn't just about career change anymore. His interactions with Sarah had become a measuring stick for his own growth and potential. The possibility of working in her professional sphere represented not just a job opportunity, but a chance to prove that he could transform his post-military struggles into something meaningful. He arrived at the cafe 10 minutes early, choosing a corner table that offered good sight lines and privacy for conversation. Sarah appeared exactly on time, dressed in casual civilian clothes that somehow managed to look both professional and approachable. She ordered black coffee and settled across from him with the same alert, assessing expression he had come to recognize. "Before we start," she said, "I need to understand what you're really looking for. Career change is one thing, but what I do requires a specific type of person. The work isn't just about fitness knowledge. It's about understanding psychology under extreme stress, maintaining security protocols, and working with people who operate at the absolute pinnacle of their profession." Marcus had prepared for this question, knowing that his answer would determine whether the conversation continued. "I want to use my military experience to help other service members reach their potential. I've realized that my transition problems came from trying to abandon who I was in the military instead of finding ways to apply those experiences constructively. Working in military fitness consulting would let me stay connected to that culture while contributing something valuable. Sarah nodded, but her expression remained neutral. That's a good start, but it's also what most people would say. Let me be more specific about what this work actually entails. She leaned forward, her voice taking on the tone of someone delivering a briefing. Military fitness consulting at the level I work isn't about running boot camp classes or helping people lose weight. It's about designing training protocols that can mean the difference between mission success and failure, between operators coming home alive or not. The people I work with are preparing for situations where physical conditioning might be the only thing standing between them and death. Marcus felt the weight of her words, understanding that she was testing his comprehension of the stakes involved. I understand. In Afghanistan, I saw how fitness levels affected everything from decision-making under stress to the ability to carry wounded teammates. It's not abstract when lives are on the line. Exactly. And that means the people doing this work need to be held to the same standards as the operators they're training. Physical conditioning is just the foundation. You also need expertise in exercise physiology, sports psychology, nutrition, injury prevention, and recovery protocols. More importantly, you need the emotional resilience to work with people who are pushing themselves beyond normal human limits. Sarah paused to sip her coffee, giving Marcus time to process what she was telling him. If you're serious about this path, the first step would be assessment. I need to evaluate your current capabilities and identify areas where you need development. What would that involve? Physical assessment first. Not just strength and endurance, but movement patterns, recovery capacity, and ability to maintain performance under stress. Then, written examinations covering anatomy, physiology, and training methodology. Finally, practical demonstrations where you design and lead training sessions for actual military personnel. The scope of the evaluation sounded comprehensive and challenging, exactly what Marcus would have expected from someone of Sarah's caliber. How long would the assessment process take? Depends on how well you perform. Could be a few weeks if you're already operating at the required level. Could be months if you need significant development. Most importantly, there are no participation trophies in this field. If you don't meet the standards, you don't advance. Period. Marcus appreciated her directness. The military had taught him to value clear expectations over false encouragement. When could we start? Sarah studied his face, looking for signs of hesitation or uncertainty. There's something else you need to understand. If I agree to mentor you through this process, it's not going to be like our casual conversations at the gym. I'll be evaluating you constantly, and I'll expect you to meet military standards for professionalism and performance. That includes taking feedback without getting defensive, maintaining confidentiality about everything you learn, and understanding that my reputation depends partly on the quality of people I recommend. Understand. You be vouching for me with your professional contacts. Exactly. Which means I need to be absolutely certain you're ready for that level of responsibility. Marcus took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the opportunity before him. What do you need from me to feel confident about moving forward? Sarah was quiet for a moment, apparently weighing her decision. When she spoke again, her tone had shifted slightly, becoming more collegial and less evaluative. I think you have the foundational qualities needed for this work. Your military experience gives you credibility with the target population, and your recent behavior shows me you can learn from mistakes and adjust your approach. But I need to see how you perform under controlled stress before I can recommend you for anything more advanced. What did you have in mind? Next week, I'm conducting a training assessment for a group of Marine reconnaissance candidates. It's part of their selection process, and I need an assistant to help with administration and observation. If you're available, you could help me run the assessment while I evaluate how you interact with the candidates and handle the pressure. Marcus felt a surge of excitement mixed with nervousness. This would be his first exposure to Sarah's professional environment, his chance to see her in action and prove himself worthy of her mentorship. I'd be honored to assist, he said. What should I expect? 12 Marines, all competing for 6 slots in an advanced reconnaissance training program. They'll be under significant stress, some will fail, and all of them will be pushed beyond their comfort zones. Your job would be to help maintain safety protocols, record performance data, and assist with equipment as needed. Most importantly, you need to maintain professional detachment while watching people struggle. The description reminded Marcus of his own military selection experiences, the combination of physical challenge and psychological pressure designed to reveal character under stress. Will the candidates know I'm being evaluated as well? No. As far as they're concerned, you're my assistant, which means you need to project competence and authority even though you're still learning. Any questions about your qualifications or background get referred to me. Marcus nodded, understanding the delicate nature of his position. He would be representing Sarah's judgment while simultaneously being tested himself. One more thing, Sarah continued. This assessment takes place at a military training facility. That means background checks, security protocols, and absolute adherence to operational security requirements. Anything you see or hear during the assessment is classified information that cannot be discussed outside of official channels. Understood. I still have my security clearance from my Army service. Good. That simplifies things considerably. Sarah reached in her bag and pulled out a folder containing several documents. These are preparatory materials. Fitness testing protocols, psychological assessment guidelines, and safety procedures. I need you to review them thoroughly before next week. There will be a verbal exam on this material before we begin the assessment. Marcus accepted the folder, feeling the weight of serious responsibility. Anything else I should prepare for? Yes. Be ready for a very long day. The assessment starts at 0500 hours and runs until completion, which could be 12 hours or more depending on how the candidates perform. Bring multiple changes of clothes, high-energy food, and prepare mentally for watching people fail at things that matter to them deeply. That sounds like the hardest part. Sarah's expression grew more serious. It is. Part of this job is understanding that not everyone is cut out for elite military service, and that the selection process serves an important purpose. You'll see good people reach their limits and not make the cut. Learning to maintain objectivity in those situations is crucial for this line of work. As they finished their coffee and prepare to leave, Sarah offered one final piece of guidance. Between now and next week, I want you to think carefully about whether this is what you really want. Once we start the formal assessment process, you'll be committed to seeing it through regardless of the outcome. If you have any doubts, it's better to address them now rather than during a live evaluation. Marcus met her gaze directly. I've been thinking about nothing else since our conversation at the gym. This feels like the first meaningful direction I've had since leaving the military. I'm ready. We'll see, Sarah said, but there was something in her tone that suggested cautious optimism. As they parted ways outside the cafe, Marcus felt a mixture of anticipation and anxiety about the week ahead. He had 1 week to prepare for what would essentially be a job interview conducted in front of 12 Marines fighting for their military futures. The stakes couldn't be higher, and failure would mean not just losing an opportunity, but disappointing someone whose opinion had become increasingly important to him. That evening, Marcus spread the materials Sarah had given him across his kitchen table and began studying with the intensity he had once applied to mission planning. The protocols were complex and detailed, covering everything from medical emergency procedures to psychological evaluation criteria. As he worked through the documents, Marcus began to appreciate the sophistication of Sarah's profession and the level of expertise required to do it effectively. By the end of the week, Marcus felt as prepared as possible for what lay ahead. He had memorized the protocols, researched the facilities where the assessment would take place, and mentally rehearsed his role in the process. Most importantly, he had thought deeply about Sarah's warning regarding emotional detachment and believed he was ready to maintain professionalism regardless of what he witnessed. What he couldn't have anticipated was how dramatically the assessment would test not just his professional capabilities, but his understanding of his own character and potential. The next phase of his journey would challenge everything he thought he knew about strength, leadership, and what it truly meant to serve others in high-stakes situations. The morning of the assessment, Marcus woke before his alarm, feeling the familiar pre-mission combination of alertness and controlled anxiety. Today would determine whether his new path was viable or just another false start in his difficult transition to civilian life. Either way, he was about to learn things about himself and Sarah that would change his perspective on both military service and personal potential. Marcus arrived at the Marine Corps training facility 45 minutes before the scheduled start time, wanting to familiarize himself with the environment and ensure he was prepared for whatever Sarah might need. The base was located an hour outside the city, surrounded by dense forest that provided privacy for the specialized training activities conducted there. As he passed through the security checkpoints, Marcus felt the familiar comfort of returning to a military environment, even temporarily. Sarah was already there when he arrived, dressed in military-style utility pants and a performance polo that managed to look both professional and practical. She was reviewing clipboards with a Marine gunnery sergeant who would be overseeing the administrative aspects of the assessment. The casual competence with which she interacted with the senior enlisted man made it clear that this was routine for her. Just another day in a career spent working with elite military personnel. "Rodriguez," she called out when she saw him approaching. "Good timing. Gunny Martinez, this is Marcus Rodriguez, my assistant for today's assessment." Gunnery Sergeant Martinez gave Marcus the kind of evaluative look that senior NCOs perfected over decades of assessing younger soldiers and Marines. His handshake was firm, his demeanor professional but cautious. Rodriguez served with the 75th Rangers, Sarah added. 2 deployments, combat experience. The addition of his military credentials seemed to shift Martinez's assessment slightly, moving Marcus from complete unknown to someone with at least basic credibility. "Welcome aboard, Rodriguez. Hope you're ready for a long day." "Roger that, Gunny. Looking forward to it." Sarah led Marcus through a briefing on the day's schedule and his specific responsibilities. The 12 Marine candidates would arrive at 0500 hours for initial processing and briefing. The assessment itself would consist of multiple phases designed to evaluate different aspects of their physical and psychological readiness for reconnaissance training. "Your primary responsibility is data collection," Sarah explained, showing him the forms he would be using to record performance metrics. Every exercise has specific measurement criteria that need to be documented precisely. These records become part of the candidates' permanent files and influence their future assignments. Marcus studied the forms, noting the detailed performance categories and the objective standards that would determine success or failure. The assessment was clearly designed to eliminate subjectivity and ensure that only candidates who met specific benchmarks would advance. What happens if someone gets injured? Marcus asked. Depends on the severity. Minor injuries, we document and continue. Major injuries, we evacuate, and the candidate is automatically eliminated from the current selection cycle. Part of your job is helping maintain safety protocols that minimize injury risk while still creating appropriate stress. At precisely 0500 hours, a transport vehicle arrived carrying the 12 Marine candidates. Marcus watched as they disembarked, noting the mix of anticipation, nervousness, and determination on their faces. They ranged in age from early 20s to mid-30s, all in excellent physical condition, all carrying themselves with the bearing of experienced Marines who had earned the opportunity to compete for advanced training. Sarah addressed them with the kind of professional authority that Marcus had seen in the best military leaders, clear and direct without being unnecessarily harsh. She explained the assessment process, the standards they would be measured against, and the fact that not all of them would advance to the next phase of training. This assessment is not designed to be fair, she said, her voice carrying across the formation. It's designed to identify Marines who can perform at exceptional levels under adverse conditions. Some of you will discover today that you're not ready for reconnaissance training, and that's not a reflection of your value as Marines or as people. It's simply information about where you are in your development. The first phase of assessment was individual physical performance, a series of exercises designed to measure strength, endurance, and movement quality under increasing levels of fatigue. Marcus found himself impressed by the sophistication of the evaluation protocol. This wasn't just about maximum performance, but about how candidates maintained technique and decision-making ability as they became progressively more exhausted. As the candidates moved through the exercises, Marcus observed Sarah's evaluation process with fascination. She wasn't just watching their physical performance, but noting their responses to setbacks, how they encouraged teammates, and how they handled the stress of being constantly observed and measured. During the endurance phase, a candidate named Corporal Johnson began struggling with the pace. Marcus watched as the young Marine's form deteriorated and his breathing became labored. It was clear that Johnson was approaching his physical limits, but he continued pushing forward with a determination that was both admirable and concerning. "Watch this," Sarah said quietly to Marcus as Johnson approached an obstacle that required upper body strength he clearly no longer possessed. This is where we learn about his judgment under stress. Johnson attempted the obstacle 3 times, failing each time as his exhausted muscles refused to support his body weight. On the 4th attempt, he fell awkwardly and landed hard on his shoulder. The injury wasn't severe, but it was clear that his assessment was over. "Johnson," Sarah called out, "report to the medical station." As the corporal limped away from the course, Marcus felt a pang of sympathy. The young Marine's disappointment was visible, and Marcus found himself remembering his own experiences with military selections where small margins determined major career consequences. "How do you handle that?" Marcus asked Sarah during a brief break in the assessment. Watching good people fail at something that matters so much to them. Sarah looked toward the medical station where Johnson was being evaluated. By remembering that the selection process serves a greater purpose. Johnson's not ready for reconnaissance training, and sending him anyway would put both him and his future teammates at risk. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is help someone understand their current limitations. The afternoon phase shifted to team-based exercises designed to evaluate leadership and communication under stress. The remaining 11 candidates were divided into groups and presented with complex tactical problems that required both physical execution and strategic thinking. Marcus found this portion of the assessment even more revealing than the individual performance measures. As the candidates worked through the exercises, Marcus began to see patterns that distinguished the likely successful candidates from those who were struggling. It wasn't always about physical superiority, but about the ability to maintain effectiveness when multiple stressors accumulated. The best performers were those who could think clearly while exhausted, communicate effectively under pressure, and adapt their approach when initial plans proved inadequate. One candidate in particular caught Marcus's attention. Sergeant Williams, a slightly built Marine who wasn't the strongest or fastest in the group, consistently emerged as a natural leader during the team exercises. His calm demeanor and clear communication style seemed to bring out the best performance in his teammates, even when they were all operating at the edge of their capabilities. "You've noticed Williams," Sarah observed, appearing beside Marcus as he watched the team exercises. "He's got something the others don't. Leadership presence under stress." "Exactly. Physical conditioning gets you to the selection, but character determines who actually succeeds in the field." Williams understands that his job is to make his team more effective, not just to showcase his individual abilities. As the assessment continued into the evening hours, Marcus found himself gaining a deeper appreciation for the complexity of Sarah's work. She wasn't just measuring physical performance, but evaluating the psychological and emotional qualities that would determine success in high-stress military operations. The assessment was as much about character revelation as physical capability. During the final phase, a stress-induced decision-making exercise conducted in darkness, Marcus witnessed something that changed his understanding of both the assessment process and Sarah herself. One of the candidates, Corporal Davis, suffered what appeared to be a panic attack during a confined space navigation exercise. He became disoriented and began hyperventilating, clearly unable to continue with the task. Marcus watched as Sarah immediately moved into the exercise area, her demeanor shifting from evaluator to caregiver in an instant. Her approach to Davis was gentle but authoritative, using techniques that suggested extensive training in crisis intervention and psychological first aid. "Davis, focus on my voice," she said, positioning herself where he could maintain eye contact. "We're going to breathe together. In for 4 counts, hold for 4, out for 4. Stay with me." Over the next several minutes, Sarah guided Davis through a recovery process that was both professional and compassionate. She didn't dismiss his struggle or make him feel ashamed of the psychological response, but rather helped him understand it as information about his current readiness level. When Davis had recovered enough to be safely removed from the exercise, Sarah spoke with him privately. Marcus couldn't hear the conversation, but he could see that it was supportive rather than punitive. Whatever she was telling him, it was helping him process the experience constructively rather than as a personal failure. "How did you learn to do that?" Marcus asked when Sarah rejoined him at the observation station. "Trial and error mostly. Early in my career, I focused entirely on physical assessment and didn't understand the psychological components. I had to learn that breaking people down without helping them understand the experience was counterproductive for everyone involved." Marcus found himself thinking about his own experience in the gym weeks earlier, when Sarah had handled his aggressive behavior with the same combination of firmness and understanding. Her skills weren't just about fitness training, but about helping people navigate the psychological challenges that came with testing their limits. As the assessment concluded near midnight, 6 candidates had met the standards for advancement to reconnaissance training. The other 6, including Johnson and Davis, had been eliminated for various reasons ranging from physical limitations to psychological unreadiness. But what impressed Marcus most was how Sarah conducted the final briefing. Rather than simply announcing results, she took time to speak with each eliminated candidate individually, helping them understand what they had learned about themselves and how they might approach future development. For those who advanced, she offered specific feedback about areas where continued improvement would be important. The assessment doesn't end when the exercises stop, she explained to Marcus as they cleaned up equipment. How candidates handle both success and failure tells you as much about their potential as anything they did during the physical challenges. As they drove back toward the city in the early morning hours, Marcus found himself reflecting on everything he had witnessed. The assessment had been designed not just to measure current capabilities, but to reveal character under stress and provide learning experiences that would benefit all participants regardless of the outcome. "What did you think of today?" Sarah asked as they neared the city limits. Marcus considered his response carefully. "It was more complex than I expected. I thought it would be mostly about physical performance, but it was really about understanding people and helping them discover their own capabilities and limitations. That's the job. Physical conditioning is just the tool we use to reveal what's underneath. The real work is helping people understand what they learn about themselves in the process." "And what did you learn about me today?" Sarah glanced over at him, a slight smile on her face. "That you're ready for the next phase of development. Your ability to maintain objectivity while still caring about the candidate's well-being tells me you understand the true purpose of this work." Marcus felt a surge of relief and excitement. The assessment had been as much about his evaluation as it had been about the Marine candidates, and apparently he had passed whatever test Sarah had been conducting. "What comes next?" he asked. "Now the real training begins. If you're committed to this path, I'll help you develop the expertise needed to work in this field. But understand that today was just the introduction. The actual development process will be much more demanding." As they reached the city and prepared to part ways, Marcus realized that his journey of transformation had really just begun. The encounter with Sarah that had started with his misguided aggression had evolved into an opportunity to completely reshape his post-military career. More importantly, it had shown him a way to honor his military experience while serving others who were pushing themselves to achieve elite performance. For the first time since leaving the Army, Marcus felt like he had found not just a career path, but a calling that would allow him to use everything he had learned about discipline, resilience, and leadership in service of something larger than himself. The small woman he had tried to intimidate in a civilian gym had become a mentor who would guide him toward becoming the person he was meant to be. The soldier who had cornered the PT girl had discovered that she led SEAL Team Fitness, but more importantly, he had learned that true strength came not from intimidating others, but from helping them discover their own potential for excellence. In trying to prove his superiority, Marcus had instead found his purpose, and in the process, he had gained something far more valuable than victory in a pointless confrontation. He had found a future worthy of his past.